All right, let's look at Joshua chapter 3. This chapter tells the story of the Israelites crossing the Jordan River. After the death of Moses, God chose Joshua to lead the people of Israel. Joshua sent 2 spies to Jericho, and when they returned, they reported that the people of the land were terrified of the Israelites because of what they had heard about God's power. Joshua 2:24. Then Joshua and all the people of Israel moved from Acacia Grove and came to the Jordan River, where they camped for 3 days before crossing. After these 3 days, the officers went through the camp and gave instructions to the people. They told them, "When you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God being carried by the Levitical priests, you are to set out from your place and follow it. However, keep a distance of about 1,000 yards between you and the ark. Do not go near it. This way you will know which path to take, because you have not traveled this way before." Joshua 3:3-4. Joshua also spoke to the people, saying, "Consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do amazing things among you." Joshua 3:5. To the priests, Joshua said, "Take up the ark of the covenant and go on ahead of the people." So they took it up and went ahead. Joshua 3:6. The Lord then spoke to Joshua and said, "Today I will begin to exalt you in the eyes of all Israel, so they will know that I am with you just as I was with Moses. Command the priests who carry the ark of the covenant, when you reach the edge of the Jordan's waters, go and stand in the river." Joshua 3:7-8. So Joshua told the Israelites, "Come here and listen to the words of the Lord your God." He continued, "This is how you will know that the living God is among you, and that he will certainly drive out before you the Canaanites, Hittites, Hivites, Perizzites, Girgashites, Amorites, and Jebusites. Look, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth will go into the Jordan ahead of you. Now choose 12 men from the tribes of Israel, one from each tribe. As soon as the feet of the priests who carry the ark of the Lord of all the earth, touch the waters of the Jordan, the waters flowing downstream will be cut off and will stand up in a heap." Joshua 3:9-13. When the people broke camp to cross the Jordan, the priests carrying the ark of the covenant went ahead of them. It was harvest time, and the Jordan was overflowing its banks. But as soon as the priests who carried the ark reached the Jordan and their feet touched the water's edge, the water flowing downstream stood up in a heap a great distance away, at a town called Adam, near Zarethan. The water flowing downstream toward the Sea of the Arabah, that is, the Dead Sea, was completely cut off. So the people crossed over opposite Jericho. Joshua 3:14-16. The priests who carried the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood firm on dry ground in the middle of the Jordan, while all Israel passed over on dry ground until the whole nation had completed the crossing of the Jordan. Joshua 3:17. Joshua chapter 3, and highlight aspects that might be challenging for non-Christians to understand. Explanation of the story. Joshua chapter 3 is a powerful narrative demonstrating God's faithfulness, his power over creation, and his establishment of Joshua's leadership before the people of Israel. Divine preparation and consecration. Joshua 3:1-5. The Israelites had been wandering for 40 years, and now they were on the cusp of entering the promised land. Before such a monumental event, God required them to consecrate themselves. This meant setting themselves apart, purifying themselves, and focusing their attention on God. This act of consecration was a spiritual preparation for the miraculous work God was about to do. It reminds us that approaching God and his work often requires a heart prepared and set apart for him. The Ark of the Covenant and God's presence. Joshua 3:3-4, 6:11-13. The ark was the most sacred object to the Israelites, representing God's presence among them. By having the priests carry the ark ahead, God was showing that he himself was leading them into the land. The command to keep a distance from the ark underscored its holiness and God's majesty. This act signified that their entry into the promised land was not by their own strength or wisdom, but by God's divine guidance and power. God establishes Joshua's leadership. Joshua 3:7. Just as God had been with Moses, he promised to be with Joshua. This miracle at the Jordan River served as a public demonstration to all Israel that God had truly appointed Joshua as their leader. This solidified his authority and prepared the people to follow him into the difficult task of conquering Canaan. God often confirms the leaders he chooses through undeniable signs of his backing. The miraculous crossing. Joshua 3:14 to 17. This is the climax of the chapter. At the height of the Jordan's flood season, God commanded the priests carrying the ark to step into the overflowing river. The moment their feet touched the water, the river parted, creating a dry path. This was not a natural phenomenon, but a supernatural act of God, echoing the parting of the Red Sea. It demonstrated God's absolute sovereignty over creation and his ability to remove any obstacle in the path of his people when they obey his commands. The standing of the water in a heap a great distance away at a town called Adam, Joshua 3:16 ESV, highlights the supernatural nature and scale of the miracle. In essence, Joshua 3 teaches us about God's direct involvement in the lives of his people, his faithfulness to his promises, and the importance of obedience and consecration. It establishes that their victory in Canaan would come from God alone. Things difficult for non-Christians to understand: the supernatural intervention of God. For many non-Christians, the idea of a personal God directly intervening in natural laws to part a river is difficult to accept. A secular worldview often seeks natural explanations for all phenomena. The Bible, however, presents God as the creator and sustainer of the universe, who is not bound by natural laws but established them and can suspend or override them at will. Genesis 1:1, Colossians 1:16 to 17. This requires a fundamental shift in understanding reality. The concept of a chosen people, the idea that God would choose one specific group, the Israelites, and perform miracles exclusively for them, might seem unfair or exclusive to those outside the Christian faith. From a biblical perspective, God chose Israel to reveal himself to the world, and through whom the Messiah, Jesus Christ, would come. Genesis 12:3, Romans 9:4 to 5. This choice was for a redemptive purpose for all humanity, not merely for one nation's benefit. The authority of the Ark of the Covenant and priestly role. Understanding the significance of the Ark as a symbol of God's presence and the unique role of the Levitical priests requires grasping Old Testament covenant theology. Without this context, the specific instructions regarding the Ark and the priests might seem arbitrary or ritualistic rather than deeply symbolic of God's holy presence and his established means of relating to his people. The relationship between faith and obedience. The miracle occurred after the priests stepped into the water. This act of stepping into the overflowing river, based solely on God's command, required immense faith and obedience. For those who prioritize empirical evidence and rational thought above all else, acting purely on a divine command, especially when it seems illogical or dangerous, can be a foreign concept. The biblical narrative consistently shows that God often acts in response to obedient faith. Hebrews 11:6. The nature of God's justice and promise. While not explicit in Joshua 3, the broader context of entering Canaan involves the displacement of other nations. This can be a point of difficulty for non-Christians who might question God's justice in such actions. The biblical understanding is that the Canaanites had repeatedly engaged in severe idolatry and immoral practices, and that God, as the righteous judge of all the earth, was bringing judgment. Genesis 15:16, Deuteronomy 9:4 to 5.